All right, anatomy and physiology students, this is our little cheat sheet on how the immune system works. First, these are the main cells that are involved, and you can see the first one they introduce is the basic workhorse of the immune system, or the macrophages, which are the cells that engulf foreign invaders like a bacteria. So this is the whole macrophage. That's a little bacteria it's surrounded. That's its nucleus. That's a lysosome that it's probably got some hydrochloric acid or something to kill the bacteria. This is a cell from our body that's been infected by a virus, and this is pieces of the virus or proteins from the virus that this cell is presenting so that other cells of the immune system, in this case cytotoxic T lymphocytes, these are cells that can come, recognize those viral proteins and kill this cell. And then these over here are the ones that help with immune memory and making sure all the rest of the immune system gets activated. The helper T lymphocytes and the B lymphocytes. So those are the main players that we have. Let's take a look at how it all works. If we go on to, this is basically non-specific immunity. It's a macrophage. It recognizes a bacteria, it engulfs it and kills it. But then it can do something else to activate the specific part of the immune system. It breaks down the bacteria. It takes a little protein from the bacteria and puts it on its surface so it can call in the lymphocytes or the cells that specifically recognize that protein. In this case, these are T cells, and these are what we call the helper T cells. And these are the guys that each one of them has a different kind of surface receptor that can recognize different kinds of presented viral or bacterial proteins that the macrophages or other cells might present to them. And the one that recognized it, this is the one that gets all happy, and it starts sending out all of these interleukins or signaling proteins in the blood to bring in more cells that will help with the infection. So we had the non-specific, the macrophage just kills the bacteria, but now we're going to bring in all the cells that can recognize proteins that bad bacteria has. So as we continue, this happy T cell, it's the one that recognizes this, sends out its interleukins, it divides itself, it creates memory cells, so there will be lots and lots of these guys to recognize those bad bacteria proteins if that bacteria should ever come in again. And it also stimulates the macrophage to reproduce, so we get more and more macrophages to kill off those bad bacteria. So that's one kind of response. Now, these helper T cells then have two different things that they do. They're calling it cell-mediated and antibody-mediated response. It's basically more T cells and bring in the heavy armor, the B cells. And if you're wondering, yes, there's duplication here, and some people think that there's even two separate kinds of evolutionary innovations in the immune system to give like a backup system. So let's look at what they call cell-mediated, or what else can the T cells do? Well, in this case, here's a cell that now has been infected by a virus. And viruses, remember, are different because they actually enter into the cell. They use the cell's own machinery to create copies of themselves. But this cell is able to take some of the proteins, bad proteins from this virus that identify it as a bad guy, put it on its surface, and that calls in this kind of cytotoxic T cell. And this is another kind of cell that can actually kill, in this case, the body's own cells. So it's in that way, another way it's killing the cell because it's infected with a virus. Once that happens, well, guess what? The cytotoxic T cell, along with the helper T cell that's sending out the interleukins, gets even more activation of more cytotoxic cells and helps to continue to kill what is now all these, not just one, but what are surely millions and millions of cells that have been infected by this virus. And the interleukins also bring in the bacteria or the macrophages that are going to clean up the mess of the killed cell that was infected by the virus. So that's one kind of like the T cell response to the virus, and to some extent the bacteria, when we looked at how those helper T cells help to spread the word about the bacterial infection as well. These things tend to work more or less the same for either a bacterial or a viral infection. Then we have what we call antibody-mediated immunity, and these are the B cells. So what happens here, there's our old friend, the helper T cell, the one that was all happy, that was able to recognize that bad bacterial or viral protein, what we call an antigen, and it's now presenting it to a B lymphocyte. These are the cells that make antibodies, and so what happens? The B lymphocyte gets all excited by the interleukins. The other T cells come in. The details of all of this are not that important, but what happens is now that B lymphocyte, the one that has the particular antibodies, again, these are kind of like those receptors on the T cells. They just have a slightly different forked shape to them. Whoops, sorry about that. They have a little forked shape to them. These B lymphocytes that make antibodies, this is the particular one that has an antibody that recognizes this bad bacteria in this case, or it could be the viral proteins. And this one starts making lots and lots of copies of itself, and then it has something else it can do that's above and beyond what the T cells do. These cells not only make copies of themselves, but they make lots and lots of these antibody proteins that go into the blood that have this particular shape, that the next time that bacteria comes in to the body and has that protein, that bad bacteria, or that virus, and has that protein that's recognized by these antibodies will glom onto it, and they won't even give it a chance to start reproducing, and they will also right away call in all of these other B cells and quickly stop the infection. So that's how we get immunity after being exposed to a disease one time, because there are all these antibodies in B cells, as well as copies of those T cells that recognize the proteins from that particular invader. So it's kind of a duplicate system. Both the B cells and the T cells get activated, but these B cells are the ones we most often think about, and the B cells are also the ones that tend to be activated by a vaccine. What does the vaccine do? Instead of having to have the actual bacteria to stimulate these B cells and cause the whole disease, we just inject the particular antigens or proteins from that bacteria or from that virus that get these cells activated. It can sometimes make us have even a little bit of fever, but we don't get the whole disease. And then we have those cells ready to combat the actual bacteria or actual virus if it ever should enter our family. So that's the whole story on the immune system. Just to remind you, the key players are the macrophages that actually engulf bacteria. The viral infected cells present antigens on their surface to get those cytotoxic cells activated, and then you can also get, either by the viral infected cells, or the macrophages can stimulate the helper lymphocytes that recognize that antigen, and they in turn can get the B lymphocytes excited to make the antibodies and forever be ready to combat whether it's a particular viral antigen or bacterial antigen. By the way, you wouldn't really have those same things in one cell, but it's just for purposes of illustration. So that's the quick story of how specific immunity works from Big Picture Anatomy.